Hello everyone, let's have more news about the Steelers, but first don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Darius Slay has lots of praise for amazing new teammate DK Metcalf. The Pittsburgh Steelers have made a couple of big additions this offseason. Just before free agency began, Pittsburgh sent a 2025 second-round pick to the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for DK Metcalf. Shortly after, Darius Slay was added via free agency as well. Slay and Metcalf have their history, to say the least. Despite that, Metcalf has clearly impressed Slay, who spoke highly of him on Wednesday. "Me and him, DK Metcalf, had a lot of great competition," Slay said, speaking with Dave Lawley and Matt Williamson on SNR Drive on Wednesday. "We had played against each other one time before, but just watching him from afar, he's amazing, man. Great deep ball threat, guy's gonna attack the ball. Guy plays with a lot of passion, and he's gonna be one of the best in the business. Great competition is certainly one way to describe the history Slay and Metcalf have." Back in 2020, when Slay was a member of the Eagles and Metcalf the Seahawks, the two got into a squabble. Slay ended up receiving an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty after throwing a punch at Metcalf. While Slay hurt his team with the penalty, you've got to admire the courage to stand up to Metcalf, who's certainly a larger figure. That said, competition runs high in sports, especially when the players involved are professionals. Players get into squabbles constantly, and Slay has already mentioned that he harbors no ill will towards Metcalf, with the two playing for the same team now. That's not even the only Steelers teammate Slay has history with. Last season, he got into it with Darnell Washington. Washington has also stated that he's not upset about that incident anymore either. Everyone's on the same team now, and there is certainly work to do ahead of the 2025 season. Slay is right that Metcalf should be an excellent addition for Pittsburgh. Last year, the Steelers had no depth at the position, and their WR1 was temperamental too often. They're in a similar situation this year, but Metcalf feels like a step up from Pickens. Given the lack of depth, though, the Steelers will need Metcalf to produce consistently week in and week out. As for Slay, he's in a much different role. Now 34 years old, the Steelers don't need him to be their star player on defense. That's what they've got TJ Watt and Cam Hayward for. What Slay does provide is a solid option on the opposite side of Joey Porter Jr., who Pittsburgh hopes Slay can be a mentor for. If the Steelers have a good season in 2025, Slay and Metcalf will likely have contributed to it. It's good to hear that Slay has moved past the grudge and is clearly excited to be on the same team with Metcalf going forward. Now let's go to another video. Don't forget to leave a like.
We know Mike Tomlin's track record and just persistently not having a losing record, but how far can these Steelers go if week one, QB1 is Mason Rudolph?
Look, they're not going to be contenders for their division crown, and that's just a fact as far as I'm concerned. Like, you're going to be in a division, man, that has Joe Burrow in it with all of his weapons back, and we'll see how the defense goes for Cincinnati. And then you're going to be in a division with Lamar Jackson, who arguably is quarterbacking the best roster in the NFL. And Cleveland is not a team you can sleep on. It just isn't. I would take Cleveland's quarterback room right now, as presently comprised, 100 out of 100 times over Pittsburgh's quarterback room as presently comprised. I would. So that leaves me to believe that, look, if Aaron Rodgers does not report to them at some point in time here between the start of their OTAs and their mandatory minicamp, and that if he is not in there in that building, on the football field, in the practice field, in the meeting rooms with those quarterbacks, that offensive line, those running backs, the wide receivers, and he's just going to show up in training camp at some point in time, they are way behind, man. They are way behind. They are ice skating uphill in a division where everyone else, outside of Cleveland, obviously a quarterback, is kind of set and ready to roll. In a conference overall that has nothing but standout quarterback play when you're talking about the AFC. And the last time I checked, the Steelers don't measure themselves, historically by just being competitive. They're trying to win the North, and they're trying to win the conference, and they're trying to win Super Bowls. That's how they judge success in Pittsburgh. Not being competitive, not being respectable, not, hey, can you win 8.5 games? Can you win 9.5 games? Can we just keep Mike Tomlin's streak of being a plus 500 football coach, alive? That's not how they judge success. And if they don't get Aaron Rodgers in there, it's going to be one of those years where every single game they're going to be holding on for dear life.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Lou. And if you don't get Aaron Rodgers in there, guys, think about this. Lives are going to change. I mean, if you just think about the mentality of Cam Hayward and Minka Fitzpatrick, if I'm going to the first game of the season and I look out there and Mason Rudolph or Will Howard is my quarterback, why the hell am I out here wasting my time? If you're Cam Hayward going into year whatever it is, why are you out here giving everything you have for Will Howard or Mason Rudolph? No disrespect to either one of them, but we're not going anywhere with them at the quarterback position. So why am I out here in my umpteenth year in this league trying to win a championship when offensively and organizationally we're not? And so they have to know something about Aaron Rodgers. Otherwise, they are taking years off the life of guys who are potential Hall of Fame players. When you talk about Cam Hayward and TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick, if you go out there with Mason Rudolph game one, if I were Cam Hayward, I might not even show up game one, because if you're not going to put forth the effort offensively or organizationally, why do you want me out here? Like, that's the level that the Pittsburgh Steelers have taken this to by the way they've handled this quarterback situation. And it's no disrespect to those guys. Will Howard may be a good quarterback someday down the road, but he ain't winning nothing right now for the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's why they need Aaron Rodgers, and they better know something that we don't, Graz.
So, yeah, Graz, I mean, everybody's looking at you. Any update on when we might get a decision from Rodgers?
I do not know. There's only one person in the world that has that information. It is Aaron Rodgers. He will share it when he feels it's important to share it. I just think, Boog, if the Steelers know something about Aaron Rodgers, it's that he wasn't that much better last year than Mason Rudolph was. I just don't feel like that's going to make a huge difference in terms of how the Steelers play this year. I think the Steelers are approaching this offseason as there weren't a lot of great options at quarterback, so we'll take what we can get and lean into our strengths.
And since Big Ben retired 2021, the Steelers have thrown the fewest touchdowns in the NFL play, last in points per game after Week 8. New head coach Ben Johnson was hired away from Detroit to help resolve that. OTAs got underway yesterday for Chicago with year 2 on the horizon for number 1 pick Caleb Williams. Coach talked about starting off on the right foot, with his QB today.
It starts with developing a rapport and a trust, and that's earned over time. You don't walk in day one and expect that to be achieved. And so the more time we spend together, he understands that I have his best interests at heart, and vice versa. He's going to go out there and play as well as he possibly can, not just for himself or me, but for the whole team and the city.
Bears reporter Courtney Cronin was there today. Courtney, you've been there for a few years and a few different head coaches. What did you see today that showed signs of change in this Ben Johnson regime?
Well, Phil, before we even get to any of the football that we saw at day 2 of OTAs, it was what Ben Johnson said at the podium, getting out in front of the story that's been the centerpiece of the Bears organization for the last week. The information that came out in Seth Wickersham's book regarding Caleb Williams and the pre-draft process. And Johnson got out in front of it and said that he talked to his quarterback last week. He felt it needed to be addressed, but that Williams is his own man, is going to be treated as such. And there were a couple of questions that came up about the feelings that Williams had about the organization previously, what happened last year. Obviously, Johnson cannot speak to that specifically, but said in the 4 months that he's worked with Williams, he has been, quote, outstanding. And after a couple more questions, he was asked the obvious one, the big elephant in the room, the feeling from Carl Williams, Caleb's father, that Chicago is where quarterbacks go to die. And this was the eye-opening moment for me today, hearing Ben Johnson responding to that, saying, quote, I love it. He wants the opportunity to change that narrative in 2025. He believes that that is where, quote, great journeys will begin. Now, as Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson begin their rapport, remember, it is only day 2 of OTAs. There were a couple of mistakes on the field today, and I go back to a conversation I had with Jalen Johnson last month about this increased accountability that these players are hoping to see on the field. And I said, what does that look like in 2025? He told me point blank, if you see it, call it out. That is exactly what happened from Ben Johnson today at OTAs. There was a moment during 7-on-7 where veteran tight end Cole Kmet was not lined up properly, and Johnson had no issue letting him know. Even the veterans are not immune from getting yelled at from time to time, that he needed to be in the right place. It's only day 2 of the install, and Johnson has reiterated time and again he expects there to be mistakes on the field. Right now is when they should be making them, but there are too many pre-snap penalties, some mental lapses that Johnson felt he needed to call out right in the moment. So as they get on the field tomorrow for the final day of OTAs this week, those things can be corrected.
Day 2 of the install, year 2 with Caleb Williams, and Ben Johnson knows all too well, coming from Detroit, how challenging that division is going to be in 2025. Courtney Cronin, thanks so much. Well, the Bears addressed major needs this offseason after going 5-11, an 11th losing season in the last 12 years. They brought in Ben Johnson. The O-line allowed the league high in sacks, so they got guards Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson, as well as center Drew Dahlman. And then they got Caleb Williams, some more weapons in the draft, taking tight end Colston Loveland and wide receiver Luther Burden with their first 2 picks. Back here with Dan Graziano, Booger McFarland, and Louis Riddick. And Graz, last week, we heard these stories come out. Courtney mentioned them as well about Williams not wanting to go to Chicago before ultimately deciding that maybe he's the guy to turn this franchise around. What is a realistic ceiling for Caleb and the Bears in 2025?
I think, Phil, if they can get to around 500 and show progress as the year goes on, that would have to be considered a successful season. People want to talk about playoffs. I just feel like that's a little unrealistic given their division, the strength of the other 3 teams, all of whom made the postseason last year, and given the fact that Ben Johnson is a first-time head coach. Caleb Williams is still a young, developing quarterback. And when you listen to Ben Johnson talk and you hear Courtney Cronin talk about the things he has said since he got there, he is talking about building something. He is not talking about putting the finishing touches on something. That's down the road. Right now, they're out there, they're making mistakes, they're figuring out what they need to work on, and that's a process that could take a little while and might bleed into the season, honestly. So it's about how quickly it comes together. I think this year is going to be about building towards something for the Bears in the future.
Look, there's some high-level players on this football team. No doubt. Let's just start there. There's some high-level players at some really key positions. They revamped this football team inside out, starting on the offensive line, the center and the 2 guards. They go in the draft and they get 2 just absolute studs in Colston Loveland, Luther Burden to go along with Rome Odunze, DJ Moore. That's ridiculous right there. I mean, that's a lot of weapons right there for a young quarterback to work with. Obviously, the centerpiece is Caleb. And really now it's about going from what sounds like, by all accounts, incompetency surrounding him in terms of the people who were leading him and directing him as to how to study to be a quarterback, how to play quarterback, how to call plays for a quarterback, of his skill level, and then how to correct him and help him continue to develop. He didn't have any of that last year. Now he has a guy that last year during 2024, we spent nothing but hour after hour just absolutely raving about Ben Johnson's creativity, his ability to take Jared Goff's game to a whole nother level, and the fact that he was going to be a slam dunk head coach in 2025. Well, now here it is, right? And we've seen teams go worse to first before. I'm not saying they're going to go worse to first because I agree with Graz. This is a very tough division, very tough. And we haven't even talked about the defense. Dennis Allen is a hell of a defensive coordinator. If you ever talk to him about defense, he knows his stuff. So this football team should be much, much, much improved. They're just in the heck of a division.
So here's what I want to say about Caleb Williams, and I wasn't in that building and inside those meeting rooms, but when we talk about a pressure standpoint and how much pressure is on him, think about this. He's come out and said that the staff was incompetent in preparing him how to play and read defenses, blah, blah, blah. Well, when you say that, I think everyone that works in the NFL has Ben Johnson in high regard. And so now all the incompetency that you said you got last year, that is gone. And so if we're going to believe you and take your word for it, and I don't know if I'm willing to do that because I hadn't heard the other side, and I'm not going to disrespect all the coaches from the Bears that were there last year, but if you're going to come out and be on record and said that those people that prepared you were incompetent, then you better come out and play a hell of a lot better this year. And I agree with you, Louis. It's a ton of talent on that team. They've surrounded him with an offensive line. Everybody said that the Bears' offensive line couldn't protect. They went out and they did that. Well, what about the weapons? You got Luther Burden and Rome Odunze. You got weapons on the outside. You got running backs. The only piece left is the quarterback. And you said you didn't get coaching last year, so let's go get the best offensive mind that we can, and they did that in Ben Johnson. So now, Caleb, what are the excuses? It's kind of like what Antonio Tarver asked Roy Jones years ago. Roy, what you going to say now? What's going to be your excuse now? There are no more excuses. Caleb Williams has to show up and not only play, guys. He's got to play at a high level. I think that's the only expectation that I would have if I was a Bears fan. And I think if you're in the Bears organization, that's what you better expect from him.
And also, in a way, kind of comparison being the thief of joy, the other rookie QBs, Drake May, his promise, Bo Nix getting the Broncos back to the playoffs, gee whiz, Jaden Daniels, all that he did in Washington, Caleb Williams now.
Dẫn các bạn cách làm một sợi thun cột tóc đơn giản từ len nhé.
Listen to the latest updates on Rodgers today. We actually put out a video earlier that has nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers. So you can check out that video after today's show, or if you just don't want to hear about Aaron Rodgers, period, today, we did put out a video earlier today not talking about Rodgers. So check out that video if you don't want Rodgers content today. But as I said, guys, I went through the entire 3-hour conversation about an hour and a half ago, and throughout the entire 3 hours of conversation between Rodgers and Rogan, they did not talk about football for 1 minute of it, all right? It was a lot of talk about the COVID vaccines and aliens and all this different stuff that, Trump and Elon and all this different stuff that, Rodgers loves to talk about politically speaking. But I think he probably told Rogan before he went on, he's like, listen, man, I don't want to get into my free agency or anything like that. I don't even want to talk about football. I just want to talk about what's going on in the world and my take on that. And he certainly had a lot to say. 3 hours is a pretty long conversation, but none of it was football related, which of course means he didn't give any updates in terms of the status of when or if he's going to sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason. But we did get one nugget, and it has to do with the quote-unquote personal issues that he alluded to when he went on the Pat McAfee show a couple of weeks back. And this was the exact quote of they were talking about some stuff, certain things that cause cancer. And he says, I've been in the weeds with these people who are close to me that have cancer. So essentially he disclosed on Rogan this week here that the part of what the personal issues that he's been dealing with this offseason, and he doesn't feel comfortable signing with an NFL team before these things are resolved, is that he's dealing with certain people in his life that are very close to him that are suffering from cancer. And, that's very unfortunate. Obviously, we don't know the extent to their cancer. We don't know if it's terminal. We don't know if it's, that they're fighting it right now or whatever the case may be. But obviously, that seems to be a pretty valid explanation for, your mind not being ready to completely lock in on an NFL football season. And, if he completely misses OTAs this year because he feels like he still needs to attend to the people that are close to him that are dealing with this really tough time in their life, then it would be understandable to me. Now, would I love him to be at Steelers OTAs this year, which start next Tuesday, by the way? Absolutely. Would I love him to be there for mandatory minicamp, which begins on June 10th? Absolutely. I think the more time that he spends with the Steelers, building a connection with his new center, Zach Frazier, building a connection with the receivers in the Steelers wide receiver room, the more Arthur Smith can get a feel for him as a quarterback and Rodgers can get a feel for Art as a play caller. I think the more bugs that you can work out in OTAs, the better before you hopefully hit the ground running when you get to Latrobe and Steelers training camp in late July. But a big question that is popping up here, because cancer's a pretty big deal here, guys, and it's certainly possible that, especially if they're fighting this thing, it's not a guarantee that this situation is going to be resolved by the start of the NFL season. So the question that is on a lot of people's minds right now is, will this situation with the people in Aaron's life that are dealing with cancer, unfortunately, and by the way, our hearts go out to him and the people that are close to the people that are dealing with this illness. Cancer is really a tough thing to be going through. Especially if there's people in your life that you're close to that are dealing with it. But could it prevent Rodgers from signing with Pittsburgh at all this offseason if the situation doesn't improve? And I think the answer to that question is it certainly has the potential to get that way, especially if things get worse and, things get, start to get to a point where Rodgers could be losing people close to him because of this disease. If that's what happens, then that sucks, and the Steelers will probably have to look in another direction, especially if Rodgers just doesn't feel like he's in the mental space to play football in 2025. But I will say, I do think that he will play this year. And according to his biographer, Ian O'Connor, he says that he has a pretty good feel of what the situation is, and he thinks that Rodgers will sign by the end of the month of May. This is what O'Connor, his biographer, had to say about the situation. I'm not doing consistent day-to-day reporting on his life, but I have occasionally reached out. The sense I got was, I think I have a pretty good sense of what his quote-unquote personal issues are, and I don't think it's something that would prevent him from playing football. I just think verbally, because the scenes are behind the scenes, not that he guaranteed it, but he's told the Steelers, listen, I'm going to play for you. I just don't want to go there and then miss part of mandatory minicamp because of my personal issues. I'm pretty sure they're going to be solved by the end of May, at least in my satisfaction, where I can give you my all. So that's where I think he is. He knows it was an embarrassment in New York largely, and he's the face of that embarrassment. Whether that's fair or not, that's the case. It may be me as an optimist, but I think this is going to work out. Do I think the Steelers will win the Super Bowl next year? No. But if you told me 11-6 with at least one playoff victory, I think that's realistic. And then not only does Ian O'Connor think that it's in play for Rodgers to sign within the next week or at least before the month of May, but Adam Schefter from ESPN said today on Wisconsin radio that he says it's quote-unquote on the table for Rodgers to sign within the next 7 days. This is what Schefter had to say. We've heard Art Rooney II, the team owner, say he expects Aaron Rodgers to sign there, and they have mandatory minicamp June 10th to the 12th. So I would think that Rodgers is on the table here in the next week or so. And then also Mike Florio, who claims to have a source on Rodgers, who says that he would be quote-unquote surprised if Rodgers isn't there for when the Steelers OTAs begin next week, Tuesday. So very, very shortly. This is what Mike Florio had to say. This year, the Steelers' mandatory minicamp is June 10th through the 12th, but the Steelers only have 6 OTA days before the mandatory minicamp. Teams can have up to 10. I think he will be there the next Tuesday, May 27th, when Phase 3 begins. That's 9 practices before training camp. That's enough time to get properly ensconced. I think he's I don't know this, but I think there's going to be a press conference this week, and he'll be there with the team next Tuesday. I'll be surprised if he's not. So my take on this entire situation, guys, is that, at this stage in the game, who knows when Aaron Rodgers will sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers and whether if he will sign. Because, if this situation with the cancer, turns out to be quite dangerous for the people close to him in his life, and he feels like mentally speaking he just can't give his all to an NFL team, and he might just decide not to play this year and just decide to retire. And honestly, that would be a more than understandable thing, especially if this stuff gets to be pretty darn bad. But I do think that, based on what Ian O'Connor, his biographer, is saying, who says that he has a pretty good sense of the situation, he thinks Rodgers is going to be able to play this year, and he thinks that he's going to be able to sign with the Pittsburgh Steelers relatively soon. It seems like the other people that are kind of monitoring the situation and how the Steelers feel about this, it certainly seems like the Steelers expect Rodgers to sign at this point. And if the Steelers felt like this situation was going to end with Aaron Rodgers choosing retirement, they probably would have already moved on. They would have gone in another direction at this point, as opposed to continue to wait for Aaron Rodgers at this point in the offseason. Now, I will say anything is possible. Rodgers could absolutely still retire and, go be Joe Rogan's podcast host or, co-host for all I know. He certainly seemed to be enjoying himself talking about all the different stuff that they talked about on that show today. But it certainly seems like the people close to Rodgers expect him to sign with the Steelers here soon. And I do think that it would be beneficial for him to be there for Steelers OTAs. That is, if he feels like he's in the mental space to be able to commit to the Pittsburgh Steelers at this point in time. That'll be it for today's edition of Steelers Talk by Chat Sports and today's Aaron Rodgers update. I will say, guys, keep your eye on the Pat McAfee show here on Thursday and Friday, okay? Of course, I can't remember if it was a Thursday or a Friday when he went on McAfee the last time, but he has always given McAfee his scoops, okay? He announced he was going to go to the Jets back in 2023 on McAfee. McAfee had a scoop that Devontae Adams was going to go to the Jets before he got traded there officially. So,
Aaron Rodgers reveals reason for delay in his Steelers decision. Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback target Aaron Rodgers has not yet signed with the team due to personal issues he wanted to iron out. On the Pat McAfee show in April, Rodgers said he would not sign a deal with a team until he felt he could fully commit to them with his personal life in order. I am trying to be open to everything and not specifically attached to a decision. I'm not holding anyone hostage, Rodgers said. I've been upfront from the beginning. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone on a team. I'm just going through a lot in my personal life that has to take priority. I don't think it was fair to the Steelers or anyone while I deal with a lot of things off the field. The people that know, the people that don't make up expletive about me. In his latest interview on the Joe Rogan Experience, Rodgers may have just revealed and hinted at the issues he hopes to resolve in his personal life. Rodgers said multiple people in his life are dealing with serious illnesses, including cancer. I figured it out during the last year when I've been in the weeds with these people who are close to me that have cancer, Rodgers said. That is taking a personal toll on Rodgers, who discussed non-conventional treatment options on the podcast. Still, he offered no certain timetable for a decision and seemed focused on his personal life first before anything else. His biographer Ian O'Connor believes that Rodgers will ink a deal sooner rather than later. O'Connor notes that Rodgers was irked. He took heat last year for missing mandatory minicamp with the New York Jets for a pre-planned trip to Egypt. If he has something similar this year, he might not want to ink his deal until after the spring calendar. OTAs for the Steelers start next Tuesday on May 27th, while mandatory minicamp will not occur for another 3 weeks, starting on June 10th. And you, fan, what do you think about Aaron Rodgers' situation? Leave your opinion in the comments.